In recent days, interviews promoting a new book have circulated widely. Within them are repeated claims about Elvis. The ones I address here are not accurate. I do not raise these points to argue, but because of my cousin deserves the truth.
I remember the first time I saw her. Small, poised, almost too still for a girl her age. She had that kind of beauty that didn't come from warmth, it came from calculation. Every movement felt rehearsed, every glance measured. Elvis was smiling that day, wide and open, the way he did when he wanted everyone around him to feel at ease, but I could tell he was trying too hard. You learn to see these things when you grow up in the Presley family. There's a difference between a man smiling because he's happy and a man smiling because he wants to believe he is. The house smelled like fried chicken and cologne that afternoon. Grandma was humming in the kitchen. Elvis had just come back from a movie shoot, still half in costume, laughing about how the makeup girl had glued his sideburns unevenly. It felt like a normal day until she walked in, and suddenly everything was. She wasn't rude, she wasn't loud, but there was something in the air, like static before a storm. Even the sound of her heels across the floor felt deliberate, like punctuation marks in a sentence she'd already written in her head. Elvis introduced her with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is Priscilla," he said, and the room went quiet. I remember Grandma wiping her hands on her apron and giving her that kind smile she gave to guests. "Well, bless your heart," she said. "Any friend of Elvis's is family here." But the moment their eyes met, I saw Grandma's smile falter just slightly. It wasn't dislike, it was recognition, like she'd seen this story before and already knew how it would end. For a while, things seemed fine. Priscilla was polite, sweet, eager to please. She'd laugh at Elvis's jokes even when they weren't funny. She'd offer to help in the kitchen, but somehow never really did. The women in our family were doers. We didn't sit and pose. We cooked, we cleaned, we listened. And yet she sat there, legs crossed, lips just barely curved into a smile, as if the whole world were a photograph and she was waiting for the flash. At first, I thought maybe I was being unfair. Maybe she was just nervous. Elvis could make anyone nervous. He had that kind of power. But then I saw the way she watched him, not with love, with calculation, with ownership. Like she was already rearranging her place in his life, fitting herself into every corner, replacing the people who'd been there all along. There was a night I'll never forget it when Elvis was sitting at the piano singing softly to himself. Grandma and I were in the living room folding laundry. He'd been quiet all evening and I knew his mind was somewhere far away. Priscilla came down the stairs, slow, almost floating, and slipped her arms around his shoulders from behind. "You sing too loud," she whispered, giggling like it was a secret, but I saw his shoulders tense just slightly. He stopped playing. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he said softly, "Darlin', music's the only thing I don't turn down." It was the first crack, small, invisible to most, but I saw it, and once you see a crack, you start noticing how far it runs. In the months that followed, the house changed. The laughter in the kitchen grew quieter. Grandma stopped humming when Priscilla was around. My mama, who never held her tongue, started biting it clean through. There was something about that girl that made people careful. Even Elvis seemed to orbit differently when she was near, like the gravity in the room shifted. She'd talk about the world outside Graceland, about Paris and perfume and the kind of fame that didn't belong to men like Elvis. She dropped little comments about how ordinary family life was, how it held people back. "You could do so much more," she'd say, resting her chin on his shoulder. "You could be so much bigger." And he'd laugh it off, but I saw the weight of her words settle on him. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from watching someone you love slowly change right in front of you. It doesn't happen all at once. It's one compromise here, one new habit there, one less dinner with family, one more night alone in his room. And by the time you realize he's gone, he's still standing right there. People think fame ruins a man. They're wrong. Fame just gives the wrong person a microphone. Elvis was the same boy he'd always been, gentle, restless, hungry for love. But when Priscilla came along, the noise got louder. And somehow she was always holding the volume knob. I remember Grandma sitting on the porch one evening, hands folded in her lap. She looked at me and said, "That girl's got ice where most folks keep their tears." It was the only time I ever heard her speak ill of anyone, and she said it like she was mourning something, not angry, just sad. Still, Elvis loved her, or maybe he loved the idea of her. She was everything the world told him he should want: beautiful, mysterious, delicate, and after Anita left, he was hurting. He wanted comfort. He wanted to believe that maybe this was the one who'd finally understand him. I don't blame him for that. We all want to be seen. We just forget that some people see us only for what we can give them. Once late at night, I heard voices down the hall. Elvis and Priscilla were arguing, not shouting, but the kind of quiet arguing that hurts worse because it's full of restraint. I couldn't make out every word, but I remember hearing her say, "You're never really here." And his reply, "You don't want me, you want the world to see you with me." Then silence, long and heavy, and the next morning she was gone for a few days. When she came back, she was sweeter than ever. That was her rhythm: withdrawal and return, distance and affection. She knew how to make him chase her just enough to forget the pain. The family tried to embrace her. We really did. There were birthdays, holidays, dinners where we'd all sit around pretending the air wasn't thick with unspoken words. Grandma would pass her the mashed potatoes and say, "You like 'em creamy or chunky, honey?" And Priscilla would smile that same polite smile, never answering directly, always halfway in another world. She never called Grandma Mama, though Grandma would have loved that. She never called my Uncle Vernon, only Mr. Presley. She kept a formality about her that built a wall we couldn't cross. Elvis noticed it too. You could see it in the way his eyes followed her when she walked out of a room, as if he was trying to figure out what she was thinking and why he couldn't reach her anymore. He was used to connection, to laughter, to love that was messy and loud. But with her, everything was quiet and polished. It was like loving a reflection in glass. You could see it, but you could never touch it. I think he believed he could change that if he just gave enough of himself, she'd finally open up. But she never did. Instead, she learned him, his routines, his weaknesses, his soft spots. She learned how to sound like love. The night they got married, the house was silent. No family dancing, no laughter, just photographs. The pictures made it look grand, but those of us who knew better could feel the hollowness behind every smile. Grandma said afterward, "It's a wedding, not a coronation." But you wouldn't have known that from the way Priscilla carried herself, like a queen ascending a throne. After the wedding, things got worse. She had the status now, the title, Mrs. Presley. And with it came a strange kind of distance that none of us could bridge. She'd visit less, call less, and when she did come around, she'd talk about Elvis's career like it was a company she helped run. He'd nod along, too tired to argue. I used to watch them and wonder when love had turned into a performance. Still, there were moments, fleeting ones, when Elvis would look at her like the world still revolved around her. And maybe for him it did, because no matter what she did or didn't do, he kept believing. He always believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Once after a family gathering where she'd left early, Elvis sat with me in the den, eyes red from exhaustion. He said, "Donnie, you ever feel like you're holding on to smoke?" I didn't know what to say. He smiled, shook his head, and said, "It's pretty when the light hits it, but you can't keep it." That was the most honest thing I ever heard him say about her. By then, the distance between her and the rest of us had become a canyon. She stopped calling Grandma entirely. Letters went unanswered, even Christmas cards came back stamped return to sender, and still we said nothing, because in our family, silence was respect. We didn't air private pain. We waited, hoping love would fix what pride had broken. But love doesn't mend what isn't meant to stay. Years later, I'd read the things she wrote in her book, the way she twisted memories, rewrote events, painted herself as the victim and Elvis as the villain, and I'd think back to those early days. The way she'd smile at him in public and roll her eyes in private. The way she'd say we when things went well and he when they didn't. I saw it then for what it was, not love, but control disguised as devotion. Sometimes I wonder if she ever loved him at all, or if she just loved the reflection of herself standing next to him. Maybe it was both. Maybe she convinced herself it was love because it made the story prettier. But I know what love looked like in that house. It looked like Grandma waking up before dawn to make sure Elvis had his favorite breakfast ready. It looked like my mother ironing his shirts even when her hands were tired. It looked like laughter echoing through the halls when he'd sneak into the kitchen for late-night banana pudding. That was love. Simple, unconditional, real. And that's why watching it all fade hurt so much. Because what replaced it wasn't hate, it was emptiness. A polished kind of emptiness that smiled for cameras and fooled the world. People think betrayal always comes loud, with shouting, breaking, storming out. But sometimes it comes quiet, one polite smile at a time. Sometimes it looks like a woman nodding along while rewriting the truth in her head. I didn't know then how far it would go, how many stories would be rewritten, how many truths buried. I only knew what I felt that first day she walked into our home, that strange chill in the air, that silence that didn't feel natural. Grandma once said, "You can tell the measure of a person by what they leave behind when they leave the room." When Priscilla left, she took the warmth with her, but she also left something behind, an emptiness that's hard to describe, like the echo after a song ends. And now, looking back, I realize that was the beginning of it all, the slow unraveling, the quiet rewriting of history, the moment when love started losing to pride. I didn't know then how much it would cost us, but I can still see her standing there, smiling that perfect smile, while Elvis looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer. I wanted to believe it too, I really did. But something inside me whispered what none of us wanted to say out loud: some prayers are better left unanswered. Fame has a strange way of turning people into mirrors. The brighter the spotlight, the harder it becomes to tell where the reflection ends and the person begins. For a while, Elvis tried to keep both worlds alive, the stage and the home, the legend and the man, but slowly one started devouring the other. And standing in the middle of that slow consumption was Priscilla. By the early 70s, everything around him was noise. Reporters at the gates, fans camped on the lawns, the phone ringing every few minutes. He'd retreat upstairs sometimes, shutting the world out for a few precious hours, but peace never stayed long. She had built a rhythm around him, appearances, photographs, and quiet corrections of the story that no one else dared to challenge. You could feel it, how she was rewriting him while he was still alive. There was a time she called herself his anchor. But an anchor's job is to hold something steady, not to sink it. I'd watch her smile through interviews, telling people how she understood him better than anyone else, and yet when he reached out for comfort, she was already halfway somewhere else, lost in a life that looked more like performance than partnership. One evening, he came by the house looking bone-tired. He didn't have to say a word. He just sat down at Grandma's kitchen table, hands clasped, staring at nothing. "They don't see me anymore," he said. "They just see the name." He meant the world, but part of me knew he meant her too. He was living in the middle of his own myth, and it was Priscilla who seemed to hold the pen. Her words started finding their way into papers, little quotes about struggles at home or creative frustration. She knew exactly how to paint herself as the patient saint beside a troubled genius. Every article, every appearance added another layer to the story she wanted the world to believe. Inside Graceland, though, the picture was different. There were nights filled with laughter and warmth, Elvis cracking jokes, playing gospel records loud enough to rattle the windows. And then there were the quiet mornings after when he'd walk the halls like a ghost, his face pale, his voice low. Those were the days after their arguments. They weren't the loud kind, they were surgical, sharp, precise, meant to leave marks that didn't show. She had a way of using silence as a weapon. When she was angry, she'd go still, not a tear, not a word, just distance. Elvis could handle anger, he couldn't handle emptiness. It made him chase, explain, apologize for things he hadn't done. And the more he did, the smaller he became in his own home. I saw the shift in him. His laughter started sounding rehearsed. His eyes didn't linger as long on people. He was performing even at dinner. Once during a family get-together, Priscilla walked in late wearing this elegant white dress, hair perfect, makeup flawless. Everyone turned to look. She smiled, soaking it in, then said softly, "Elvis hates when I'm late, don't you, honey?" It was playful on the surface, but underneath it was a test. He smiled, said nothing, and kept eating. Later that night, I heard him packing upstairs, restless, humming an old gospel tune like it was the only thing that could steady his heart. He had always been surrounded by family, by warmth and loyalty, but with her, it felt like she was replacing the roots with mirrors. The home turned into a reflection of her image. She decided what was shown and what stayed hidden. When their marriage started cracking, she controlled the narrative even more. In interviews, she spoke of him with a soft, tragic tone. "Elvis needs space. Elvis is changing." It made her sound noble, but what she never said was that she'd already built another life outside those gates. He never asked for perfection, he just wanted honesty. But by then, honesty had become dangerous for her image. There was one night I can't forget. He'd just come back from tour, exhausted but hopeful. He told me, "I think we can fix it. I just need to remind her what's real." He had bought her a necklace, a simple gold chain with a small cross, nothing flashy. "She likes pretty things," he said, "but this one means something." He gave it to her at dinner that night. She smiled, thanked him, and placed it back in the box before dessert. "I'll wear it later," she said, but she never did. You could almost feel something inside him fold that evening. Not break, just fold, like a letter that would never be mailed. When their divorce came, it wasn't loud either, just a quiet unraveling, papers signed in silence, photographs taken, and her walking away with that same practiced grace. The world sympathized with her, painted her as the victim of fame, and Elvis, being who he was, refused to defend himself. "No good comes from fighting in public," he told me. "Let people think what they want, the truth don't need me to shout." But truth left bruises on him all the same. After she moved out, the house felt different. Lighter, maybe, but lonelier too. He filled the emptiness with music and late-night conversations with whoever would listen. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the porch before dawn, coffee going cold, saying things like, "I thought love meant giving someone everything." He'd smile, add, "Didn't realize some folks take everything and leave the love behind." The media frenzy only made it worse. Priscilla's name was everywhere, book deals, interviews, talk shows. She'd smile and say, "I'll always love Elvis," and then in the next breath hint at stories that painted him broken, addicted, unstable. She didn't have to accuse outright. Her pauses did the work, her sighs filled in the blanks. I used to watch those interviews with Grandma. She'd sit in her chair, quiet, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the screen. When one ended, she'd whisper, "She's polishing her halo with his pain." Elvis never responded publicly, that wasn't his way, but behind closed doors the silence weighed on him. He replayed those interviews, sometimes in disbelief, sometimes just numb. "Why's she doing this?" he asked once. I didn't know how to answer. Because how do you explain ambition wrapped in affection? How do you tell a man that the woman who once said she loved him now loves the story of him more? The truth was, Priscilla had learned to survive by controlling the narrative. The world wanted a tragic love story, and she gave it to them at his expense. She became the grieving widow long before he died. But here's the part most people don't know. Elvis never hated her. Even after everything, he never spoke with bitterness. He'd say things like, "We were just two different kinds of lonely." That line broke me, because it meant he still saw the good in her even when she no longer saw the good in him. There was a night not long before the divorce was finalized. He called me over, asked me to help him sort through some boxes. We sat in his office, surrounded by old letters, photos, and sheet music. He picked up a picture of them together, young and smiling, and said softly, "You know, she used to laugh different back then." I asked what he meant. He shrugged, eyes wet. "Before she learned to perform it." That was Elvis always seeing the soul behind the act, even when the act had taken over. After she left, rumors spread like wildfire. Every magazine printed a new theory: affairs, addictions, emotional breakdowns. Some of it was fabricated, some twisted. But through it all, one pattern stayed. She was always the one speaking. He stayed silent. And silence in this world gets rewritten by the loudest voice. He started losing faith in people. Still kind, still generous, but guarded. The family tried to close ranks to protect what was left of him from the vultures outside. But Priscilla's words had already planted seeds of doubt in the public's mind. They saw him not as a man grieving the end of love, but as a star spiraling out of control. One day, I found him in the music room, reading a magazine with her face on the cover. The headline said, "The Real Story of Elvis Presley Told by the Woman Who Knew Him Best." He looked up at me and said quietly, "Guess I'm learning who I was." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That moment haunts me because it wasn't anger, it was surrender. There were nights when he'd talk about getting away, selling everything, disappearing somewhere quiet, but we both knew he couldn't. Elvis belonged to the world now, and the world had been taught to believe her version. The strangest part is how gentle he stayed through it all. He'd still send her flowers on Lisa's birthdays, still call to check if she needed anything. He couldn't stop caring, even for someone who'd turned his life into a script. Once he told me maybe she needed to do it to survive. Maybe that's her way of staying close to me by keeping my name on her lips. It was the kindest possible interpretation of betrayal I'd ever heard, and that was who he was. He forgave long before forgiveness was earned. But for the rest of us, for grandma, for mama, for me, it was harder. We watched the family's history rewritten one interview at a time. The way she'd leave out names, rearrange dates, erase people who'd been there every day, it was like being slowly erased from a photograph. And every time she smiled on television, talking about the Presley legacy, I felt the walls of Graceland close in a little tighter. There's something cruel about watching someone build a career off the man you loved and then pretending it's devotion. She'd talk about his struggles, his flaws, his demons, as if confession belonged to her. But those demons she spoke of weren't his, they were hers, dressed in his clothes. He carried that quiet hurt until the end. Not rage, not hatred, just sadness. Because the truth wasn't only being twisted, it was being sold. And maybe that's what broke me most. Not the lies themselves, but how ordinary they started to sound. How the world accepted them because they came wrapped in charm. She had a way of softening cruelty until it sounded like compassion. She'd smile, tilt her head, say, "I only want people to remember the real Elvis," while stripping away the man she never truly understood. The last time I saw him cry, it wasn't over fame or fans or even his health. It was after another interview of hers aired. He turned off the TV, stared at the blank screen, and whispered, "I just wanted peace." Then he walked upstairs. I sat there a long time, listening to the house breathe. Looking back, I think that's when I realized the real tragedy. It wasn't that she left him. It was that she never stopped following him, in headlines, in books, in the stories she crafted to make herself the saint of his suffering. And maybe the cruelest part, the world believed her, they still do. That's why I tell this now, because silence lets lies grow roots. And if nobody speaks, the truth dies twice, once in the person and once in the telling. It's strange how lies don't always come roaring in. Sometimes they drift in soft, like smoke through a half-open window, until one day you can't breathe. That's what happened after Priscilla's second book hit the shelves. I remember the morning I read the first interview, coffee going cold beside me, her face printed under a headline that called her the keeper of Elvis's truth. Those words alone were enough to turn my stomach, because she wasn't keeping the truth, she was keeping control. She said he was struggling with addiction, said he was a man spiraling. I stared at that page so long the letters blurred. People love to believe the worst, especially when it's wrapped in elegance, and she knew that. She always knew how to make cruelty sound like compassion. I could almost hear her voice as I read, soft, breathy, perfectly composed. He needed help, but no one could reach him, she'd say, and the world would nod in sympathy. But what they didn't know was that she hadn't been there, not in those final years, not in the nights when he'd sit at the piano until sunrise, trying to find a song that could quiet the noise in his head. He wasn't an addict, he was exhausted, a man carrying the weight of too much love and too many expectations. The pills he took were the same ones prescribed to help him sleep, to help him move, to keep performing for people who refused to let him rest. He wasn't chasing escape, he was chasing relief. There's a difference, and it matters. I saw him during those years, up early, working, planning shows, laughing with fans who'd waited hours just to see him smile. If you looked into his eyes, you'd know he was still fighting to live, not fade. But that didn't fit her story. Her version needed tragedy. It needed a broken man, because a broken man makes for a sympathetic widow. She wrote that he was alone at Graceland, that no family was left by his side. I read that line twice. My Aunt Delta lived right there just down the hall. My mama was on the property every day. Grandma's room was still filled with flowers, the smell of lavender and old hymns lingering in the air. We were there, always. But in Priscilla's retelling, we'd vanished, deleted like we'd never mattered. I remember walking out to Grandma's grave that night, the book still in my hands. I placed it on the grass and said out loud, "She's erasing us, Mama, she's erasing you." The wind picked up just then, and I swear I could almost hear Grandma's voice saying, "Truth don't die easy, baby, but it sure can get buried." Every interview Priscilla did after that felt like another funeral. She'd sit under those bright studio lights, hands folded, lips trembling at all the right moments, and repeat the same lines about Elvis being lost. The audience would sigh, some even cry, and every tear shed for her added another layer of distance between the man he was and the myth she was building. You'd think time would dull the anger, but it didn't, because it wasn't just about Elvis anymore. It was about Lisa, about how she was being written out too. Lisa was fire and tenderness all at once. She had his eyes, the same way they softened when she laughed and darkened when something hurt. She loved fiercely, maybe too fiercely. And she carried the burden of being his daughter like armor and a wound at the same time. She once told me, "People love Dad because they can't hurt him anymore, but they still find ways to hurt me." I didn't understand what she meant until later, until Priscilla started talking about her own daughter's pain as though it were a stain on Elvis's name instead of her own. Lisa had written about the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother's boyfriend. She didn't do it for pity, she did it to heal, to tell the truth so it couldn't hold her hostage anymore. But when Priscilla publicly dismissed that truth, suggesting Lisa's memory was flawed, that her struggles made her unreliable, I saw something in Lisa break that I don't think ever fully healed. You could see it in her interviews after that, the way she smiled but it didn't reach her eyes, the way she spoke of her father like he was the only person who ever truly saw her, and maybe he was. Because Elvis had a way of making people feel safe, even when he was falling apart himself. He'd sit with Lisa for hours, playing music, reading Bible verses, telling her stories about love and forgiveness. He once told her, "Baby, don't ever let them turn your truth into entertainment." She was just a little girl, but somehow she understood. Priscilla didn't, or maybe she did and ignored it anyway, because that's the thing about control. Once you taste it, you can't let it go. I can still hear Lisa's voice the last time we talked. "I'm tired of being the villain in her story," she said. "I just want my dad back." She wasn't talking about resurrection. She was talking about legacy, the version of Elvis that belonged to his family, not to the tabloids, not to her mother's polished interviews. When Lisa passed, I watched the world grieve. But I couldn't help thinking how many of those same people had believed the lies that hurt her most. And in the middle of that grief, there was Priscilla again, front and center, speaking on her behalf, speaking for all of us, as though she hadn't been the one Lisa was trying to escape from her whole life. It was too much, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. So I started writing down everything I remembered, the moments, the laughter, the arguments, the late-night confessions. I wanted to make sure the truth outlived the lies. Some nights I'd sit in the kitchen, surrounded by old photographs, and hear the echoes of Elvis's voice in my head. "Tell it straight, Donnie," he'd say, "don't sugarcoat it." The hardest part was reliving those last days. People think they know how Elvis's story ended: overdoses, isolation, self-destruction, but they don't know the quiet dignity beneath it all. They don't know how many mornings he'd wake before dawn just to walk the halls, check on Grandma, feed the horses, talk to the security guards like they were old friends. He was kind to the end, tired, yes, but kind. The kind of kindness that still shows up in the smallest ways, like the notes he'd leave by the door, "Tell the boys to eat before they go," or "Make sure Grandma takes her medicine." Those aren't the actions of a man lost to addiction. They're the actions of someone still trying to take care of everyone else while the world took pieces of him. But that wasn't the version Priscilla told. Her stories became darker, twisted with half-truths. She'd talk about late nights filled with pills and despair, but never mention the laughter, the warmth, the family that surrounded him. She'd say he was unpredictable, but not how his heart softened when he held his daughter. She erased context, stripped love of its complexity, and turned memory into merchandise. And that's when I realized what hurt most. It wasn't that she lied, it's that she lied beautifully. The world loves a beautiful lie. Every time she spoke, another piece of the real Elvis disappeared. Fans began to quote her version, journalists recycled her words, and documentaries echoed her tone like scripture. Slowly, the man I knew was vanishing behind her carefully crafted myth. One evening, I found an old letter he'd written tucked between photo albums. It was dated October 2, 1977, the day she claimed he'd been reinterred. He wrote about missing his mama, about wanting to build a quiet garden near her grave. His handwriting was neat, steady. The date proved her story wrong, but that didn't matter. Lies don't need proof, they just need repetition. That night I sat at the piano he used to play, the same one that still carried the faint smell of his cologne. I pressed one key, then another, trying to imagine his hands there instead of mine. I thought about how much he'd given: his voice, his body, his privacy, his peace, and how all of it had become a narrative owned by someone else. Maybe that's what betrayal really is, not the act itself, but the silence afterward. The emptiness left behind when someone tells your story and you're no longer around to correct it. When I finally spoke out publicly, people said I was bitter. Maybe I was, but bitterness is what truth tastes like when it's been buried too long. I didn't want revenge, I wanted balance. I wanted the world to see him through the eyes of those who truly knew him. I told them about the man who knelt beside his daughter's bed every night to pray with her. The man who cried when a fan mailed him a broken toy because it reminded him of how simple love used to be. The man who sang gospel not for applause but because he believed heaven could hear him. That was the real Elvis. Not the caricature, not the addict, not the tragic legend, but a man who loved deeply and hurt quietly. Even now, I can hear people debating his flaws like they're footnotes on a resume. But if you strip away the gossip, the fame, the endless speculation, you're left with a man who gave the world his heart and got his story stolen in return. The day I watched Priscilla give yet another interview, this time dismissing Lisa's words as confused memories, something inside me snapped. You can wound a man's reputation, but when you wound his child, you cross a line that no amount of charm can erase. She said, I think people forget how much pain Elvis caused. I turned off the TV right there, because the truth is he didn't cause the pain, he carried it. He absorbed everyone else's, including hers, until there was none left to give. And maybe that's the cruelest irony of all. He loved her long after she stopped loving him. Even now, somewhere in heaven, I imagine he still does. That's who he was. So I keep telling his story, not the glamorous one, not the tragic one, but the honest one. Because honesty is all we have left when fame fades and the voices of the living grow louder than the dead. If Priscilla wanted to own his legacy, she could have done it with grace, but she chose spectacle instead. And in doing so, she didn't just betray him, she betrayed the daughter who inherited his heart and the family that still carries his name. The night I burned her book, I didn't do it out of hate, I did it out of love. I whispered a prayer as the pages curled and turned to ash. Rest now, I said, they can't rewrite you anymore. The smoke rose slowly, twisting into the night sky, and for a moment I thought I saw his shadow there, laughing, free, finally unburdened. Maybe that's just memory playing tricks, or maybe it was a sign. Either way, I'll keep speaking. Because silence might protect comfort, but it never protects truth. And for Elvis, for Lisa, for every voice that's been buried under someone else's version of events, I'll keep fighting. Because the story of who they really were still deserves to be told. Sometimes I wonder what he'd think if he could see all this now. The documentaries, the interviews, the endless debates about who he was and who he was, the world still speaks his name like it's a password to something sacred. But the truth feels quieter now, buried beneath decades of noise and nostalgia, and maybe that's why I finally decided to speak. Not to defend him, but to remember him, to make sure the man doesn't vanish beneath the monument. People always talk about Elvis Presley like he was a myth, but I remember him as a man who still said ma'am to waitresses, who gave away cars not because it looked good but because he couldn't stand seeing someone struggle, who stayed up until 3 in the morning writing thank you notes to his band because he believed gratitude mattered more than greatness. That's the version I carry, the one that doesn't need defending, just remembering. The last time I walked through Graceland at night, it was silent. Not the tourist version with velvet ropes and audio guides, but the real one, the house that still breathed him. His old boots by the door, the faint scent of cologne in the hall, the piano sitting there like it was waiting for him to return. I stood there and thought about all the stories told in his name. The ones that sold books, filled theaters, made headlines. And I thought how many people ever really knew him. He wasn't a saint, he had temper, pride, moments of weakness, but every flaw was matched by something holy in him. The way he loved, the way he forgave, the way he still called his mama every chance he got even when the world thought he was too big for small tenderness. Fame didn't change that. People did, people who saw him as a ladder instead of a man. There's a loneliness that fame brings, a kind that doesn't come from being alone but from being surrounded by people who only love the reflection, and that's what haunted him most. He'd walk into a room full of applause and still feel unseen. Sometimes after shows, he'd sit in silence, staring at the lights of the city outside and whisper, "They cheer for the echo, not for me." Those words still echo in my mind like a prayer and a warning. I think about Priscilla sometimes, about how two people can look at the same memories and see different worlds. Maybe she convinced herself she was doing right by him, maybe rewriting him was her way of keeping him close. But that's the tragedy of it when love turns into ownership, the truth dies quietly in the middle. I don't hate her, I pity her, because I've learned that rewriting the past doesn't heal it, it just traps you inside it forever. What she never understood is that love doesn't demand control, it demands honesty. Elvis gave her that. He gave her everything, his time, his loyalty, his name, and all he wanted in return was grace. But some people mistake gentleness for weakness, and when the gentle leave this world, the loud rewrite the silence. There's a quote he used to love from Corinthians, "Love rejoices in the truth." He'd say it before bed sometimes, half joking, half sincere, but I think he believed it more deeply than he ever admitted. He believed that truth, no matter how painful, was sacred. Maybe that's why the lies cut so deep, because he trusted that the people closest to him would protect his name like a flame. Instead, they used it like a torch. When Lisa died, I felt something final in the air, like the last bridge between truth and myth had burned. She was his reflection in the purest form, tender, complicated, fierce. The world misunderstood her too, just like him. She carried his heart and his haunting, and now that she's gone, it feels like we're all holding the pieces of two lives the world tried to turn into a spectacle. I visit their graves often. There's peace there that you don't find anywhere else. Tourists leave flowers, fans whisper prayers, and the wind moves through the trees like a hymn. Sometimes I bring a folding chair, sit down, and just talk to him. Tell him about the world he left behind, the noise, the gossip, the way his name still fills arenas. I imagine him laughing that soft laugh, shaking his head, saying, "Well, baby, at least they're still listening." But I think what he'd really want is for people to listen differently. Not to the fame, not to the rumors, to the music, to the man, to the grace hidden between the notes. He used to say music was his prayer, that every song was a confession of something he couldn't say out loud. Maybe that's why his voice still feels alive even after all these years. It's not nostalgia, it's honesty. You can't fake that kind of soul. You can't manufacture the ache in his voice when he sang about love lost or the tremor when he whispered about faith. That was him stripped of every pretense, every myth, every lie. That was Elvis, the man who believed his gift was borrowed and his fame was fleeting. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that legacy is fragile. You think it's carved in stone, but it's really written in air, changed by whoever speaks it next. And maybe that's why I can't stop talking. Because if I don't, the silence will belong to the wrong people. I remember the last conversation we ever had. He told me, "Donnie, people can take your words and twist them, but they can't touch your heart, guard that." I didn't understand then what he meant, but now I do. He wasn't just talking about reputation. He was talking about peace, about knowing who you are even when the world gets it wrong. And maybe that's the lesson he left for all of us. That truth doesn't always win the loudest fight, it just survives the longest one. There's a part of me that still hopes Priscilla finds peace too, because the more I look back, the more I see that this wasn't just a feud, it was a mirror of everything fame destroys. Two people bound by love and loss, fighting for control of a ghost. She wanted to own him. I just wanted to remember him. Maybe that's the difference between possession and devotion. People ask me sometimes if I think he'd forgive her. I think he already did. Forgiveness came easy to him. He forgave everyone except himself. That was his quiet burden. He carried it all, the guilt, the expectations, the pressure, and never once asked the world for mercy. He gave mercy instead, even to those who didn't deserve it. So yes, I think he forgave her, but forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and what he left behind deserves to be remembered honestly, not polished, not sold, just seen. Sometimes I imagine a world where he wasn't famous, where he ran a small church choir somewhere in Mississippi, married the girl who loved him before the lights, and sang for the joy of it, not the applause. Would he have been happier, maybe? Or maybe he was meant to burn bright and fast, to leave behind something that still stirs souls decades later? I don't know, but I do know that light that pure doesn't die, it just changes form. Now when I hear one of his songs playing softly in a grocery store or through a car window at a stoplight, I don't feel sadness anymore. I feel gratitude. Because even after everything, after the lies, the losses, the rewriting, his truth still hums beneath it all. You can't erase that kind of spirit. You can't rewrite sincerity. There's a photograph I keep in my Bible, Elvis sitting on the steps of Graceland, barefoot, eyes half closed, smiling at something just out of frame. Every time I look at it, I think that's the real him. Not the legend, not the story, just a man at peace in a fleeting moment of quiet. That's the truth I choose to keep. And maybe that's what this has all been about. Not vengeance, not proving anyone wrong, just keeping that quiet moment alive. Because if love means anything, it means refusing to let falsehoods outlive the people they hurt. Elvis once said, "Truth is like a song, you can't kill it, you can only stop listening." I've carried that line in my heart ever since, so I'll keep listening. And as long as someone else does too, he'll never really be gone. Maybe that's the mystery of Elvis. The louder the world talks about him, the more his truth whispers through the cracks. Do you think fame saved him or destroyed him? And can love still be real when the whole world is watching? I'd like to hear what you believe. Because somewhere between his music and his silence lies the version of him only the honest can hear. If you don't want to miss the next hidden truth behind the Presley legacy, subscribe now so you're here when we uncover the next chapter. The story isn't over, not for Elvis, not for the people who still carry his name, and not for the ones who finally decided to tell what really happened behind those Graceland gates. The truth is waiting, don't look away.